All right, everybody. I'm not going to talk for very long because I want to give Paul every moment that he can possibly squeeze out of here. Paul and Priscilla are folks that are, I love his sense of humor, but even more so, I just love how genuine that he is, how authentic he is. I said it earlier, but he is the real deal. Paul led a church in Ireland that grew to be one of the largest churches in Ireland. He has since passed off the baton and is now spending his time traveling, speaking to churches that are massive and doing amazing things in the kingdom. And then he said he'd also come here. So we are just absolutely honored and blessed to have him. Let's give him a huge Connect Church welcome, shall we? Woo! I love you, buddy.
Thank you.
Are you on there? There you go.
Good morning, fellow Commonwealth citizens. Fantastic to be back in Canada, and particularly to be in Cranbrook. Never been in Cranbrook before, so it's wonderful to be here. You just to get Priscilla's with me, my wife. We've been married for almost 44 years. We have 4 daughters and we have 8 grandchildren. Yeah, 7 girls and 1 boy. So we kind of, I don't know what, we just sort of missed the boy thing. It's funny, my dad is the youngest of 13, one of the smaller Irish families. And there's only 1 boy left with one cousin of mine left who has boys. It's the strangest thing. Anyway, you can imagine our little grandson Charlie, Deborah, his mom, my daughter, she went to university, married a young man. They live in Cambridge. So Rob, my son-in-law, his family are quite posh, actually. You know, quite English. Hello. And Charlie's the same. So one day, he's 7 now, when he was 5, he came in. He said to Deborah, "Mummy, he said, God has spoken to me for the first time." And she said, "Well, what did he say?" And he said, "Well, I was singing my hymns of praise while bouncing on the trampoline, and the Lord spoke to me." She says, "Well, what did he say?" And he said, "Bravo." I mean, if that's the first thing that God says to you, it's pretty incredible, isn't it? I mean, it's pretty amazing. This morning, I'm taking a bit of time just because my accent. Some people go, "What did he say there?" It'll take you a few minutes to get used to it, and I get quicker. I start to talk quick as I move along, and you need to keep up with me. Priscilla and I are of a certain age, and we did something that we swore we'd never do in the last year. We went on a cruise, and we always said we went determined not to like it. You know, because old people like things like that. But you know something? We loved it. It was fantastic. And what I particularly liked about it was this, that I met people. When you've been a pastor for a lot of years, you kind of get locked in, and you kind of forget what it's like to talk to people who aren't Christians. And you make assumptions about them that just aren't true. I mean, you've been an insider for so long. Sometimes you forget what it's like when you're on the outside. And so we met loads of people. So we were swimming one day. Put it like this: Priscilla likes to go and get a book and read. I'm a reader too. But after a day with just Priscilla, I have to get away and talk to people. I have to talk to real people. And so you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? And so I started to talk to this guy, and this is terrible, but I hate telling people I'm a pastor because it usually shuts the conversation down. You know, they say things like, "We better watch our language," you know, things like that. So I told this guy, I said, "Well, you know," he said, I said, what did you do?" He said, "I was a doctor," and exactly the same age as me. And he said, "Well, what did you do? What do you do?" And I said, "I'm a pastor." And he said, "I'm the world's most confirmed atheist." That's the first thing he said to me. And then he said to Priscilla, "How does that make you feel?" Never been asked that. Emotionally, how do you react to that? And she'll tell your own story, but she said, no, it doesn't, I'm not offended by it. And she thought for a minute, she said, we say och a lot. She said, I just feel a bit sad that, something, I've somehow come to know this wonderful God who loves me and has invaded my life. And if you don't explore God and begin to try and find out who he is and, what he did for you, you'll never have that relationship. And he said, oh, and walked off. But it's interesting, he came back and said, could we have dinner with you tonight? And I'll tell you a little bit more. I'm just drawing you in here. So I'm going to read, I'm going to give you 7 things that I kind of learned, that 7 things about people who aren't Christians that every Christian should know. So, and you can, if you're not a Christian yet, please come and talk to me and say that's complete nonsense, okay? But please do that. So I'm going to read some verses from the Bible, and it's Jesus talking, Luke 15, and it says this: now the tax collectors and the sinners, funny one, isn't it? And all were all gathering around to hear Jesus. 2 groups of people: tax collectors, sinners, and this is the other group. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, so there were the outsiders and the insiders, and they're all listening. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And Jesus told them this story: suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls all his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I've found my lost sheep." And then Jesus said, "I tell you that in the same way, there'll be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who don't need to repent." And then the second story, that he told 3 here, we're going to talk about 2. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? When she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So the first thing I want to talk about is this. Number 1, the sheep did not get lost on purpose. The sheep, it munched its way to lostness. So I don't know, we eat a lot of sheep. Well, you know what it does? It put the head down and just starts munching and munched itself round. And then after about an hour of munching, it lifted its head and it realized, oh, I might be lost here somewhere. Now, why do I say that? Well, it got lost through preoccupation. I found this, that most people who aren't yet Christians get lost. They don't deliberately get lost. In other words, they haven't actually thought about Christianity and then actively dismissed it. They just have never thought about it. Now, that was a great shock to me, because I find people, life is busy. They're taking their kids to football, soccer. They're 2 different things, by the way. Could I just say that? All right? Okay. Just want to make that very clear. They take their kids to dancing. They're trying to stay healthy. Life in the Western world is very busy. They're not lost on purpose, but they're victims of the pace of life. I think, certainly for me, it was news when I talked to this man. I think that some of the things we assume about people who don't know Jesus are actually not true. We assume they're living miserable and empty lives and are consciously running away from God. They're not. We think they constantly worry about death and eternity. They're not. In fact, it's true of some people, but they hardly ever think about God. In fact, you know something? They feel sorry for us because we're weirdos. They're not waiting for us to preach to them. Now, and if that's the case, here's the point that I discovered. This man, this intelligent doctor, wealthy, had never actually considered Christianity. Now, here's the point. If that's true, and I think it is with a lot of people, don't say no on their behalf. Don't say they wouldn't be interested. Maybe if they heard something about the real thing, maybe if they heard and saw somebody who really lived passionately for Jesus, it might spark off a question. I've got a friend called Andrew Wilson. Andrew's a theologian. And he says, when somebody says to him, and he taught me this, when somebody says to him, "I'm an atheist," he says to them, "Really?" He says, well, tell me about the God you don't believe in. Now, that's a kind of an Irish thing, but if you don't believe him, you can't. Anyway, but what I mean is people have an idea of what God is like. And so you say that to somebody, and they think about it, and they go, well, this is the God that I don't believe in. And they'll go A, B, C, and D. And when that happens to me, I always go, guess what? I don't believe in that God either. Hello? And so it's really important for us. Don't assume people are closed to the real thing. Maybe they never actually heard that there is a God who loves them, that he wants to invade their life with his love and give them value and purpose and meaning and make them his child. Wow, that's really good news, isn't it? Don't assume that people are closed, because most of them don't get lost on purpose. Number two, the sheep got lost through the carelessness of someone else. And now you say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you see, in our story, there are two groups of people. There's the Pharisees. Actually, I'm going to show off here. The Hebrew is this. There's the Habarap and the Amhabaram. Literally, there's the people of the land, the outsiders, the religious non-entities, the people who don't keep the law, and the other people, the good people. And Jesus talks to both of them. And when he says a sheep got lost, and they knew what he was talking about. The implication was, you righteous people, you lost the sheep. Okay? In other words, you were careless and you lost the sheep. And then he changes the metaphor and he talks about the good shepherd. And the implication is, of course, they were careless shepherds, but he's the good shepherd. And again, they got it and they were really angry. What I've discovered is this: some people never got the chance to hear about Jesus. No options were ever given to them. Nobody ever took them to church. Their lives were controlled by other people, and they were restricted from hearing the message. Now, maybe some people didn't care enough about them, and they never heard it. No one took responsibility. Wow, let me give you a little example. Language tells you everything about people. And in Middle Eastern Semitic language, there are some things that we take for granted that are missing there. And funny thing is, Semitic language is very like the Irish language. Now, I know it's true. I know you don't believe me, but it's really true. So if you're English, you go, and you speak English, you go, I dropped the watch, okay? If you're German, and you speak German, in German it is, I dropped the watch. But in Semitic language and in Irish, it is, the watch fell from my hand. There's a subtle difference there. It means that it wasn't my fault. It means that I don't take responsibility and you can't confront me with it. The sheep went from me. That's why churches exist, actually. And churches like yours connect in this city. They want to take responsibility for this city. They want to say, actually, we've got something that will help this city and will touch the life of every individual. That's why churches exist. They exist for primarily the glory of God. But how do they work that out? By caring and loving other people. We take responsibility. I've got a friend, a really close friend actually, and he's a Baptist pastor, and we're almost the same age, and we've gone through the same stages in life, very different churches, but we're football buddies. We go together, sit together. And he told me a story about 4 months ago, and he was really embarrassed about it. He said he was preaching, he's retired, but he was preaching in another church quite close to his home, not his old Baptist church. He looked down, and before the service started, he saw somebody that he recognized, and it was his window cleaner. Do you have window cleaners here? You know, he came out and cleaned his windows, and he went up to him and he said, "Hey Joe, what? Hey, great to see you here. What brings you here?" He said, "Well, the pastor of I clean the windows of the pastor of this church. I clean the windows of the pastor of this church." Yeah, I was trying to shape it there. And he said, and you know something? He talked to me about Jesus, and he invited me to an Alpha course, and I came along, and guess what? I became a Christian. And then he said to my friend, the Baptist pastor, he said, "I cleaned your windows for 3 years." You know what's coming, don't you? And not once did you tell me about Jesus. Ouch. I don't want to think that the responsibility for people who aren't Christians rests with anybody but us. Can I give you a little challenge? Would you take responsibility for the people that you work with, go to school with, are friends with, live among? And start by maybe praying for them, but take responsibility. The sheep got lost through the carelessness of someone else. I don't want to think that anybody got lost because I was careless. Number 3, the coin didn't know it was lost. The coin didn't know it was lost. Now I'm stretching things there, but you get what I'm trying to say. There's a sense in which folks today have no concept of sin. We talk about it in the church. Jesus forgives your sins. Now, it's not that people don't know that they've messed up, that they've made mistakes, that things aren't quite right in their life. They understand that. Okay, they get that. They kind of get that. But the concept of how could I put it? A great big barrier separating them from God of sin, their sin. And their sin nailed Jesus to the cross. Most people in our society have no concept of that anymore. We've got one of our sons-in-law isn't a Christian. And you know, he says, when we talk about Christianity, etc., he goes, look, I understand community. I get the fact you love everybody. But he said, I don't get this sin thing. I don't get this sin thing. And we decided years ago in Ireland, we were quickly going down a post-Christian society, and most people didn't get the idea of sin. And when I was a boy, you know, it wasn't that everybody were Christians. They all knew they were sinners, okay. Some of them just hadn't decided and decided to give their life to Jesus. But today, it's completely different. The coin didn't know it was lost, and most of your friends have no concept that they are estranged from God and actually need someone to come in between and bring them to God. And of course, our message is that it's Jesus. One of the greatest things, and I want to commend, I saw you that you're running it, is the Alpha course. And Alpha takes people on a journey of discovering what Christianity is. And if you've never been on it, I'd recommend it to you, honestly. I think you'll find it enlightening, and I'll give you a context in which to ask some questions, because that's what we need to do. We need to listen to questions and answer them. So we do Alpha in our church. We take people on that journey of explaining Christianity to them, and at the end there's no coercion, but we kind of invite them. Would they like to take the next step by committing their life to Christ? One of the Alphas I remember in our own church, we've run over 60 of them in our church. We've seen thousands and thousands of people come to them, and I would say, you know, in the late hundreds of people come to faith in Christ in it. It's been incredible. George was certainly older than me in those days, and his daughter had come to our church and given her life to Christ, and he was very keen to find out what was going on, so he came to Alpha. And after the second week, he said to me, Paul, he said, I found a group of people to whom I feel I belong. There was a connection. And so he went right through Alpha. In those days, it was 10 weeks. And it was, you know, and at the end of the 10 weeks, guess what happened? He didn't become a Christian. And we were really disappointed, and, you know, as Christians are. And he said to me, Paul, could I come and do another Alpha? And I said, sure. And he said, but could I be a helper this time? And I said, well, George, it's slightly problematic because you're supposed to be a Christian. You know, how do you explain Christianity from your atheist standpoint? And he said, I'm going to bring 4 friends with me. I said, okay, you can. That's fine. We can do it. I mean, he became one of our helpers. Now, I know that sounds really odd to you, but honestly, he was the most enthusiastic atheist Christian I've ever met in my life. And guess what? He took the 4 friends through. They all came to Jesus, and he didn't. Honestly, I want to punch him, you know, for goodness sake. What is wrong with you, for crying out loud? And he said, so he just kept coming back and bringing people with him. Until eventually, after about the 3.5 courses, he said to me, I think I get it now. I get it now. You know, it's really important. If people don't understand the concept that there is actually something, their sin, separating them from God. It's hard for them to get a concept of that they need someone to stand in on their behalf, which is what the cross is all about. It's hard for them to get that. So I want to commit that we take people on this spiritual journey. Again, would you begin to take 3 or 4 people on a journey in this next year to let them see what it really is to be someone who surrendered their life to God looks like? If you do that, something, you'll get some questions. Most of the preaching in the New Testament was as a result of questions. As Peter, and even in Acts 2, the people said, what's going on here? What is it? Always, the Bible actually says this, it's a great line. It says, always be ready to give an answer for the hope that is within you. So provoke some questions and don't say no on someone's behalf. Number 4, we're nearly there. Okay, I've only got 72, so we're getting through them right. Yeah, I know. The sheep got lost through miscalculation. The sheep got lost through miscalculation. You say, what do you mean? Well, it calculated that it obviously didn't, but stay with me here, okay? It calculated that the outcome of its choices would be one thing, I'm eating food, but it turned out to be another, it got lost. And what you find is that even some of the rich people on the boat that we met, they'd made a small miscalculation early in their life, and it led to a really difficult disaster, to be honest with you. And a lot of people in our society are like that. They've done something in their life in the past, and it's caused consequences. A small miscalculation led to these. But here's the point: they think there's no way back again. My mum is now with Jesus. Went to be with Jesus 5 years ago. But my mum, at the age of 16, in Ireland, got pregnant. Wasn't married. Now, I mean, today it's no big deal in our society. But you can imagine in 1945 what it was like. And so I've got an older brother, 6.5 years older than me. He looks nothing like me. He's about 8 inches smaller. He's got red hair and brown eyes. It's the strangest thing. But he's my brother, and I thank God for him. But my mum really never got over the shame of what happened in her life. It was really difficult. And I didn't help her, to be quite honest with you. When I became a Christian when I was 16, mum and dad, my father, had split up. And, I remember saying to her, Mum, I've been saved. I've been a Christian for 100 days. She says, I know I've had 100 sermons. I just couldn't help myself. I used to write little verses, notes, and put them under her pillow. I mean, seriously, how crass can you get? I used to put, be sure your sin will find you out. Get that there. Get in there. And she smoked. And so there were menthol cigarettes. So I would sometimes write a little verse and put it on a cigarette and put it around. And the one she hated the most, she loved the most, I should say, was, and the wicked shall be cast into the lake of fire. So when she lit it up, it was, just showed her, so it did. It wasn't very good. And then one day, when she was in her early 50s, we lived in the same street as Mum. She came up to the house and knocked the door, as we saw her every day. I said, oh, come on in, Mum. And she went, Paul, I've made a mess and I need Jesus. And we had the privilege of leading her and pointing her to Jesus Christ. And she became a new person. She got baptized 3 weeks later. And honestly, it's the biggest joy of my life. I don't know if you know people, I'm sure you do, have made a small miscalculation and it's led to disaster. Please don't let them think that there's no way back. I don't know if you've made some bad choices, because sometimes we do, and it's led to one thing and you think, goodness, I've made a mess. The wonderful thing about the Christian faith is this: we call it redemption. In other words, there's another chance. God gives you not a second chance, but another chance, okay? It doesn't matter whether you've made 20 miscalculations and life has spiraled out of control. The incredible thing is this, that we believe in a God who, no matter where you are or what you've done, actually God says, I can still change your life. Isn't that right? It's true. And number 5, moving on. To be considered lost must mean that the item is valuable. If you search for something, generally speaking, it's because it's valuable. If you dispose of something, it's usually not valuable. And what I discovered was this, as we were on this, our cruise, that most people have no idea of how valuable they are to God. And part of our job is actually to help them realize that. To say to them, you have value and worth. I learned a great lesson. I was a boy preacher, and the Methodists ran the kind of central mission in Belfast, and they ministered to the homeless people. And what the deal was that once a week they would give free soup and sandwiches if the homeless would come in and listen to a Christian presentation. So I went down as a young man. I was probably about 19 at the time, and I saw these men, they all shuffled in, and they were just homeless people, and I'd never really seen homeless people before, and I thought, well, I'm going to give them what for, and so for about 20 minutes I harangued them about how bad they were, and about they were hell-deserving sinners, and I mean terrible stuff, and at the end of the day, you know what happened? Nothing. They all just shuffled out and got their soup and sandwiches. It was like Christian purgatory. They put up with it to get a sandwich. And when I was finished, the minister in charge, who was a bit older and wiser than me, and he said, Paul, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for speaking to these men. He said, there is just one point. When somebody says it to you, it's a stinger. And he said, Paul, he said, the men that you spoke to tonight, he said, they actually don't believe they're of any worth or value. He said that they actually realize that they made a complete mess in their life. He said, but what they don't know is that there is a God who loves them and wants to invade their life with his love. But thanks for coming anyway, Paul. Just to highlight it finally on this point, I've got two $20 bills. One is, oh look, the Queen's on it. I feel like a chorus of God Save the Queen here actually coming on me. And it's pretty new and pretty pristine. And I have another one here, and it's a bit grubby and marked, and it's soiled, and it's got fluff on it and a few marks and crease. Which is the more valuable? No, they're both the same value. See, it doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you did last night. It doesn't matter if your life is crumpled and torn and bruised and marked. The way God sees you is this. He sees you as being valuable. He loves you, and he wants to invade your life. And how do you say, so how do you actually do that? Well, you just invite him. It's a very simple thing. There's a verse in the Bible that says this, they that call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And you think, there's more to it than that. No, there isn't, honestly. As a 16-year-old, it's all I don't have anything more. I know a bit more about the Bible. I didn't know much then, but I was a broken young man. Mum and Dad had split up. It was terrible. And I cried out to God and said, Lord, I don't understand everything, but I know there's something real in this here, and I'm of value to you. I'm going to call out in your name. And you know something? He took me at my word, and that day I became a Christian. Let's tell people they're valuable, will you? Let's do that. Number 6, penultimate point, nearly finished. When you're lost, it's difficult. This isn't in the passage, but I'm squeezing it in. When you're lost, it's difficult to trust a stranger. Do you ever? I know it's different in North America because you don't have footpaths, but in Europe, people walk. Have you ever heard about that? What you do this foot forward and then you do the other foot forward. You don't drive everywhere. We seriously don't. So in the old days before Google Maps and you got lost, you used to have a map. And if you got lost, what you had to do was to stop and ask somebody the way. Have you ever said, now I don't know whether it's a man thing or not, but I would rather drive an hour out of my way than stop and ask somebody the way. Is it a man thing? It's just in me. And and Priscilla would go, Paul, we're lost. You need to ask someone. And I'd drive past. She says, ask that woman there. She's too old. She would never know. It was just the weirdest thing. And then I'd drive on and I'd go, and she'd go, ask them. They're too young. They wouldn't know either. They're too fat. They're too thin. They're too tall. They're too short. Everything I did. We had more fights in our life because of that. But what you find is this here. People who don't know Jesus, they're the same. Whenever they've got questions in life, they ask people. But they don't trust strangers. And one of the things I discovered in that ship was when you have to get to know someone and you have to actually make friends. That couple that I talked to you about at the start, the doctor, he's got a closed Facebook page and invited us to come onto it. And we are constantly in touch in that there. Something has begun to build. Will I ever see him again? I don't know. We're trying to coordinate something. But something clicked when we had dinner with them. And so people, the problem is that most of us, Priscilla and I, we don't have friends of people. We aren't friends with people who don't know Jesus. Why would they ever trust us? You've got to actually make a connection, not as a means to an end, but a genuine friendship. Let's begin to do that. And you know something, the questions will follow. Every day, almost when I'm at home, when I get up in the morning, I go for a walk and come back and I go, Lord, Lord, lead me today. I call them divine appointments. In other words, give me an opportunity. And so one day, I was going to get my hair cut. And that's not funny. And I go about twice a year, so, it lasts me that long. And I go to Donna, I go to the girl, and she says it costs next to nothing. It takes her about 2 minutes. But I know everything about her life. I know everything about her life. Because she talks nonstop. She tells me all about her children, all about herself, all the stuff she's done. Sometimes I'm sitting there going, I don't want to hear this. Please. It's just too much information. So I came in just before, about 6 months ago. And she was crying. And I said, what's wrong, Donna? She said, I've got a pain in my left shoulder. And it's kept me up all night. And I had one of those moments where I felt the Holy Spirit whisper in my ear, you need to pray for her. And I said, do I have to? It's kind of difficult. But I said, what, Lord, if there's nobody else in the shop when I go to pay, I'll know it's you. Guess what happened? Yeah, you got it. There's no one else there. So I said, Donna, I'll pray for you. And she said, well, say a little prayer for me. I said, no, I'll do it now. And the girl, their assistant, said, you've tried everything else. Why don't you try prayer? So I don't think she's ever been in church in her life. And so she stood there like this here. There's no keyboard in the playing in the background. I would have loved a keyboard player to run in and set up and go and play soft music in the background. It would have made the atmosphere really nice. But it didn't happen. And so she just stood and looked at me. It's very off-putting. You want people to go, would you close your eyes and put your... So I just said, well, could I touch your shoulder? I touched her shoulder. And as soon as I touched her, I just said, Donna, because I know about her life, remember, I said, Donna, you think that, you've done wrong in your life and God's mad and he's getting even with you. And I said, but Donna, God isn't disillusioned with you because he'd no illusions to begin with. And no matter what you've done in your life, there is a God who loves you and actually wants to help you turn it around. And I began to speak into her life, and she started to weep. She said, you made me cry now. But I think maybe for the first time in her life, somebody told her there was a God who loved her. So I go and, even if I don't need it, get my hair cut by Donna, okay? And finally, when you're lost, directions are always confusing. Isn't that true? Because the people assume that you know too much, you know a lot. Direction givers don't understand that you don't know. We've had loads of these conversations. I'll stop and I'll say, could you tell me where St. Bartholomew's Hospital is, please? We had it recently in Dublin when our daughter had a baby. And you stop and somebody goes to you, oh, sure, you couldn't miss it. They always say that to you, don't they? And they go, you take a second right, and you go down there, and you see this grocery store. It's a German one. It's called Aldi, and there's an Aldi on the left, And then you take the next after Alva, you take the first, the first, the second. It might be the third, traffic light, and you take a left there. And then you go on down and you see this gas station, and it's BP, and you'll see it up there. And then they go, you couldn't miss it. Now, they really do. Now, here's the interesting one. Sometimes there's confusion because we assume people know more than they do. And they don't actually. And that's why, don't be afraid to keep it simple, stupid. Don't call them stupid, you're stupid, okay? But keep it simple, okay? Keep it simple. Keep it simple. And there's a sense in which you're always people do not know the Bible the way they used to. And that's not a put. It's just true. A young man came to our church and was over a period of time gave his life to Jesus, and he was in his home group, connect group, cell group, whatever you want to call it, during the week. And I've been preaching from 2 Corinthians, and there's a great passage where Paul talks about all his hardships in life, and he talked about he was shipwrecked, he was flogged, he was imprisoned, he was beaten, he was near death, and it's a terrible list. And I was talking about it. So in the home group on the Tuesday night, he said they started we do a thing, we connect that Sunday talk and the midweek thing together. And he said that man, me preaching, isn't he amazing? And they said, what do you mean? They said, of course he is, but what do you mean? What do you mean particularly? And he said, he's been shipwrecked, he's been whipped, he's been in prison, he's been beaten, he nearly died. He thought I was the Apostle Paul. True. Now, honestly, it's pretty close. There's not much in it. We're pretty close together. But it made me realize that the reality is that people don't know as much as we think they do. But what they do know is this: when someone cares about them, when someone invests and touches their life, it can put a light on. Now, ultimately, they need to respond to Jesus for themselves. But remember this, that people take directions very seriously, and we assume they know more than they do. And so even when we were talking, I was using talking with our folks on the cruise, we were using phraseology, and you could see a kind of a cloud come over their eyes, like, what are you talking about? And you realize we need to keep it simple. And so as I finish now, let me keep it simple, okay? It really is simple. We believe in a God, okay, who created the heavens and the earth. And he created mankind. And it's funny, if you were Presbyterian, the Shorter Catechism starts with this: what is man's chief aim? Man's chief aim is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. So God actually made human beings to be in a relationship with himself, to enjoy God. But something came in. It's called sin. They're deciding that they could run their lives better than God could and help them with. And so God and man became actually separated, estranged. That's just a step. And all the mess in the world today goes back to that time when they made that decision. And it just came right down through humanity, through the ages. And then, 2,000 years ago, God said, he already thought about it, but he said, now's the time to do something about it. And he sent a man called Jesus, his own son. Not just a man, but God as well. The only man who actually had never sinned. And he said, I'm going to take the place of these people, and I'm going to make it possible for men and women to begin to enjoy that relationship, enjoy God forever. And then Jesus went to a cross. And you say, well, that's incredible. What do you have to do? You have to say, Jesus, thank you for doing that. I want what you came to give, forgiveness and life. And the incredible thing about the Christian message is when you do that, literally, honestly, and you really mean it, you start on a new life. It was over 50 years ago, as a boy of 16, that I did that. Have I ever regretted it? No. Has it been difficult? Sometimes it has. I never regretted it. Because I've, as Priscilla put it, as I bring it right back to the start again, to our friend, I get to enjoy this amazing relationship. It starts on earth, but the good news is it goes right through into eternity, forever and ever. We get to follow God and discover more of the God who made the universe. Isn't that incredible? It is the most wonderful good news that anybody could ever have. I don't know, I'm gonna ask you to do something. If you have never actually said that, or words like that, or we call it, taking that step and inviting Jesus into your life, maybe you might want to do that this morning. How incredible would that be? This could be the best day of your life. This could be the best day. At home, it's Mother's Day. It is. This could be the best day of your life. And you might want to say something like this. Jesus, I don't know much, but I know that you love me. And you put a value in my life. And you have a purpose for me. And I invite you into my life to take it over, because that's what happens. You don't become a robot, but he comes into your life. I want to invite you to come in to me. And if you've never done that, or maybe you did it as a child and it didn't mean a lot to you, but you want to do it, you want to say, actually, I'm going to say some words, the words of your own. They may be just, Jesus, save me. I'm going to pray now, and I'm going to let you think about that. Let's pray. Let's just close our eyes. Father, we want to thank you for Jesus. We want to thank you for that he loved us and he gave himself for us. Lord, forgive us Christians for making it cloudy and difficult sometimes. When it's profound, it's deep, it's a mystery, but it is simple. And if you're thinking about it now, you might want to say this: Jesus, I invite you into my life right now. I want to become a follower of you. Thank you for dying for me. I hand over the reins of control right now. Amen. If you said that, could you keep your eyes closed? If you said that, just so we'll connect with you. It's not for anything else. I'm not going to get you to come out. But on the count of three, just so I'm not going to prolong it. On the count of three, if you said that prayer, would you put your hand up? We would love to somehow, at some stage, connect with you. Won't embarrass you. 1, 2, 3. Let's put your hands up, okay? Just keep them up, would you, please? Because as our church, we'd love to give you something that'll actually begin to take you in those first steps and connect with you. So please, afterwards, come to the Connect Lounge. I don't know if people come and connect you. I'm gonna hand over to Frank now. Thank you so much. You've been wonderful.
You know, if you did ask God into your life for the very first time, we just have a little box over here just to give to you on your way out the door. Just let them know, hey, could I have one of those? And it'll help you begin to take your next steps. That ultimately becoming a disciple of Jesus is just the first step of the next steps. That each and every one of us are called to journey with God. We're called a disciple because it just means a learner. And we become lifelong learners about how to love him better and how to love other people better. And if that's something that you're interested in doing, then please make sure you get one of these boxes so you can connect with us a little bit more. I want to thank you so much for coming today. I want to thank you for your willingness to give up your Sunday morning. If you would like to connect with us a little bit more, then head to the info booth just out in the lobby there and let them know that you'd like to connect just a bit more. And then invite somebody out next week as we continue our series called Promised, where we are journeying towards learning even more about what that first chunk of the Bible, that big chunk, that weighty thing that is sometimes difficult to engage with, what it is that the truths are that are contained in there that kind of lead us towards desperately needing Jesus. And so we're going to continue that next week. Invite somebody out to it. It should be great. Have a fantastic week. Go and be a blessing.